Okay, hey everyone, this is Dr. Lehman, and I want to run you through a lesson using a mobile recording device on my phone. I recommend DU recorder to anybody who wants to do it. But this is related to our American history lesson, especially if you're working on chapters 4 or chapter 5 in Eric Fonner's textbook, Give Me Liberty. I want to take a look at a couple of aspects of the American Revolution, and I want to use an image study for that. So, see right now I'm pulling up my browser, going to run an image search here and get a certain image of the Boston Massacre. So this is a famous engraving here of the Boston Massacre. It's a woodcut print that depicts an event in the years leading up to the American Revolutionary War. And this event, which follows the Stamp Act and other major events on the timeline leading to the American Revolutionary War, has a major impact on sentiment in the colonies. Now, if we look at the text in some of our presentations so far, one of the things we see is that the colonies were actually a fairly religious, cultural, and linguistically diverse place. However, all that being said, it took something to make these folks who still considered themselves English subjects into revolutionaries. And certainly the vast majority of them were not actively revolutionary, but public sentiment in enough of the colonies swung towards the side of independence that you do see a successful revolution between 1776 and 1783. In this particular incident, what is depicted on this image appears to be armed British soldiers in a very organized fashion, intentionally firing a very sound volley of fire into a crowd. And you can see different depictions of it here, reprinted or reproduced in different ways. Because this particular image, this woodblock print, was used in newspapers throughout the colonies and afterwards to depict both the current events and the history of the Boston Massacre. You see the crowd over here. You have a number of people lying on the ground, injured or killed. You see a number of people trying to help others, person being fired at while their back is turned, while their arms are up, clearly helpless, pleading for support from their fellow citizens here. And this is definitely what a number of the colonists wanted us to think occurred. And it was one side of the story. Now, the reality of the story is somewhere in between. The reality was there was a confrontation between British soldiers stationed in Boston to collect taxes on imported goods, tariffs, and some local citizens who were standing outside of a pub in Boston, possibly after a long day of work, or possibly being idle on the docks because a decline in commerce had forced them to look for other work or make them unable to gain day wages. And so some pushing, some shoving, some throwing of perhaps pieces of roofing tile that had come off of the nearest building occurred. At some point a shot was fired, and nobody really knows who fired that shot. But after that, the British soldiers did fire a volley into the crowd. And in fact, the story comes to light in the trial of these British soldiers, which was held in Boston. And at that trial, John Adams, the future second president of the United States, defends the British soldiers. Now, he does so not because he didn't think an atrocity was committed, but what he argues is that the British soldiers were soldiers doing their job, and they were actually young, inexperienced soldiers, not the old grizzled veterans depicted in the image here. But he says that the blood of the slain colonists lies in the hands of the British King and Parliament, that their actions in passing unfair legislation and using British soldiers to police British subjects in the colonies, that was the crime that was committed. And he's successful in his court case. It becomes a show trial. Afterwards, it will be laws passed prohibiting the trial of British soldiers and other British officials in colonial courts. But this print is what is remembered. And it's how, if we have an image of the Boston Massacre in our head, it's probably this one. And that's because the person who crafted this image, who had this image circulated throughout the colonies, reproduced, was Paul Revere, a silversmith of the growing colonial middle class, who would be a member of the Sons of Liberty, and go down in history for the story of riding throughout Massachusetts shouting, "The British are coming, the British are here," prior to the initial shots fired at the battles of Lexington and Concord. So, on the one hand, hopefully this is a little bit of information that gives you some idea about the different forces at play in the American Revolution, but also it's a way to read sources, images, and other historical artifacts. Know who produced the images you see and why they were put in front of you. That's as much as anything is something we can learn from history. Thank you very much.